Hey Siri, what is the Hebrew word for I learn?
The Hebrew word for I learn is leomed.
Hey Siri, what is the Greek word for I learn?
The Greek word for I learn is matheno.
Okay. Hey Siri, what is the Latin word for I learn?
The Latin word for I learn is disco.
Disco?
Now playing disco.
Wait, no, not disco.
I promise I won't do any dancing this week, okay? Welcome to Bay Area Community Church. My name's Aaron. I'm one of the pastors. And whether you're online or in Odenton, in Annapolis, here in the chapel, we're glad that you are with us today. And we are finishing up a series called Disco God. As you've learned from that video, the word disco does mean I learn in Latin. And that's one of the goals of this series. We want to learn more about God. But there's a double meaning there, because just like a disco ball reflects light in every direction, the more we learn about God, the more we believe we should be reflecting God's character to the world around us. We learn more, so we reflect more of Him. And we've had a few series guidelines that I want to remind you of as we've been going through. The first one was this, that God's infinite nature isn't a reason to throw up our hands, it's a reason to roll up our sleeves. Of course, we will never know everything about God, but that is not a reason not to learn everything that we can about God. The second principle is this, that information leads to transformation. Just like with the disco ball, we learn in order to grow so we can reflect Him. The goal is not just to be smarter. That's never the goal. But the final principle is this, that sometimes we copy Him, all the time we follow Him. Sometimes we copy Him, all the time we follow Him. What do I mean by this? Well, in the first 2 weeks of the series, we looked at aspects of God's character that we should copy. Okay, we're trying to be holy as He is holy. We want to live a life of love because He is love. This week is another aspect of God's character, and it needs to impact the way that we live. But unlike the other 2 weeks, this is not something that we are trying to emulate. Okay, we're not trying to be like God in this particular attribute. We believe that God is this thing, and as a result of that, we don't have to be. In a theology world, we have terms for the difference between these two types of attributes. Here we go. Here's your Scrabble word for today. Communicable attributes and incommunicable attributes. If anyone ever gets that word in Scrabble, let me know, because that would be remarkable. But anyway, communicable attributes, what are these? These are ways that we should be like God. Okay, these are the things that we've already talked about. Communicable, if you think about this, communicable diseases are diseases that can spread from person to person. I know over the last couple of years, each of us have become experts, global experts on communicable diseases. Most of us feel like we have positions of, writing policy for global thoughts on communicable diseases, right? I know I certainly held that post for a little while, but I resigned it recently in order to take up a position as a foreign affairs leader related to international relations. I've become an expert there, and it's been fun to know everything there is to know about how countries should interact when at war. I don't really know that. That's a joke. It's okay, never mind. So, going to keep going. So, communicable diseases. We've all become experts on this. I don't know about you, though. When it comes to attributes of God, what we're thinking about here is these are things that can spread from God to us. He has these things. We want them. Examples are things like love. We want to have more love, more holy, more justice, more merciful. These are things that God is that we want to spread to us. Incommunicable attributes are ways that we can't be like God. Okay, these are things that we cannot, that we should not share with God. We cannot catch these from Him, and you'll be glad that we can't. Because here's some examples. Omnipotent. God is omnipotent. That means God is all-powerful. Thankfully, you can't catch that from God. If your little sibling had caught this from God, omnipotence, I would imagine that your life would have turned out very differently than it did, right? Aren't you glad your little brother isn't all-powerful? Or omniscient. This is all-knowing. This is the idea that God knows everything. I'm glad I don't know everything, even though at times that would be convenient. It actually would be a burden that none of us could bear. We don't want these character traits of God to rub off on us. So when it comes to his communicable attributes, what's happening here is we want to copy God. Those are his communicable attributes. But when it is incommunicable attributes, what we're saying is that we want to pursue the results of his character. Okay, what do I mean by this? Well, because God can do anything, he's all powerful, we pursue the results of that. In other words, we depend on his power. We rely on him rather than ourselves. Or because he is all-knowing, we don't have to know it all. We rely on his wisdom, and we pray and ask him to guide us, right? So that's why I'm saying sometimes we copy God, but all the time we follow him. Sometimes we copy his characteristics. Other times we simply follow him because of who he is. So with all that as introduction, today what we're going to be talking about is one of God's incommunicable attributes, and I won't say that word again, okay? I promise you are off the hook. We're looking at the fact today that God is sovereign. God is sovereign. But as we're looking at that, let me ask you a question that I already know the answer to, so you don't have to answer this. How many of you have ever asked the question, why? I know the answer that you have all done that because at some point you were all 3 years old, and that's the only question that 3-year-olds ask. But I don't know, you see it like a video on social media of people doing something, you're like, why are you doing that, right? Or you just see a group of teenage boys doing anything, and it's like, why are you like that, right? Or maybe you go to Chick-fil-A and you see people ordering Chick-fil-A sandwiches and they get them with pickles. And you're like, why? Oh, it's disgusting. That is a sandwich from the Lord and you put old, wicked, wet cucumbers on it. That's disgusting, right? You're ruining a gift from the Lord with pickles. Enough, people. We need reform. But you're asking why, right? Why would you do this, okay? I think there are 2 times that we ask the question why, all right? Here are the 2 times. When we can't figure it out, or when we hate the way that it turned out, okay? When we can't figure it out or we hate the way it turned out. An example of when we can't figure it out. This is why we ask, why is the sky blue? Or why is the word vacuum so incredibly hard to spell? Or why are the Yankees still allowed to play baseball? Like, these are just questions that we're like, I can't figure it out. Or when we hate the way that it turned out. Okay, this is when we're saying, like, why didn't I get the job? Or how did they win that election? Okay, this is when we hate the way it turned out. Or in general, like my wife asks why a lot because I do things that don't make sense a lot. So like, Aaron, why are you wandering around the house just following me? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know why I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing right now. Or she'll like, why would you eat all the cereal and then put the box back in the pantry, right? I don't know. I don't know why I did that, but I just did that, and I understand why you're asking this. But sometimes why is a genuine question. She's like, I want to know why. Like, why have you done this? We're seeking an answer. But sometimes we ask why, and we don't really want an answer. We're not expecting one. We're asking it rhetorically because what we're saying when we say why sometimes is just this. What we're saying is, I would have done it differently, right? I would have done it differently. When you're asking, why didn't you put me in, coach? You don't actually want an answer. You're just letting them know, I would have done it differently. I'd like to play more, right? So what do you do when you're asking why, but it isn't about something small? When you're asking why and you're asking God about your life or your pain, maybe you don't even know if you believe in God, but you're still asking this question. You find yourself asking it because you don't like the way things have turned out. Maybe you're asking why and saying, why was I born this way? Why did he have to leave our family? Or why would God let me be sexually abused? Why didn't he recover? Why do I have same-sex attraction? Why is she sick? Why didn't I get the scholarship? Why doesn't our family have enough money? Why do we have to move? Why can't I be smarter or thinner or more athletic? Or why do I feel unloved? Or why am I not accepted by my peers? What we're doing when we ask why is we're asking it because it seems like God is the bad guy, or he didn't stop the bad guy. We're asking why because our life hurts. And I want to suggest that when we do that, what we're really pursuing ultimately is control. We're asking why, and what we're saying to God again is that I would have done it differently. If I were in charge, God, my life would look different. My family or my health, our finances or my situation, my grades or my past. If I were in charge, I would have done it differently. But here's the thing. The sovereignty of God is an incommunicable attribute for a reason. We weren't designed to chase after more control as if somehow we ever had control of all of the factors of our life. We're meant as limited humans to simply acknowledge God's sovereignty. And do you know what it's called when you acknowledge the sovereign control of someone else? It's called trust. And this morning, I want to prove to you that I believe the scriptures teach that God is in control. And despite our tendency to ask why and to cling to the control of our life, I believe that things are better because God is in control. And so let me give you my bottom line. In the moments where life hurts, I believe what we need to know is that God is in control. So we must trust his plan. God is in control, and we must trust his plan. And I think there are two components to that statement, and I want to prove them to you this morning from the scriptures. Let's talk about that first idea, that God is in control. Ephesians 1 says it this way, that God works all things according to the counsel of his will. And of course, that's all things. That's not some things or most things or a large percentage of things occurring in my time and space. Now, this is all things. God is bringing all of them to the counsel of his will. This description says that God is in heaven and he does whatever he pleases. God is in heaven doing literally whatever he would like. Or it continues on. Here's another example from Isaiah where it says this. This is God talking. He says, what I have said, that I will bring about. What I have planned, I will do. Okay, this is very different than me. You could look one glance at my to-do list. You would see there are many things that I have planned to do that I have not done. Not so with God. It's never happened. What he plans, he will accomplish. Or this description from Job, he says, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. No one has ever stopped or foiled a plan of God. But it's not just that God makes plans and then personally makes those plans happen. The Bible is also clear. He's in absolute control of every individual and the activities of other people, including the governments. Check this out, Proverbs. It says the king's heart, the ultimate ruler of a country. That king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. In other words, God is in control. There are so many examples of this from the scriptures. The Bible is incredibly clear. God is in control. Nothing that has ever happened was outside of the control of God. Now we have to think carefully here because God never sins. He never participates in any evil. People have the freedom to choose right or wrong. But even the bad, the terrible things that happen in our lives and in the world around us, even those terrible things pass through God's hand and through his plan. Nothing is a surprise to God. There are no accidents. And if we were to stop right there, you might be scratching your head because it kind of seems like God's a jerk, right? Like he's some distant ruler in the sky. He controls everything, but he can't be bothered to stop any of the bad stuff. What I've described so far is the description of a king. And God is the king, the supreme sovereign king of all kings, who sits on his throne looking down on the affairs of the earth in total control and absolute calm. He is distantly reigning over the happenings of our planet with the control of a parent playing chess with a 5-year-old who's unsure of the rules. Absolute control. God is the king. But thankfully, that's not where the biblical description ends. God is not just the king. He is the king who cares. He's the king who cares. I said it was my goal to prove that God is in control and then show you why you can trust his sovereign control. And I believe you can trust God explicitly because he is a king who cares for you. Look at this description of God. God gives this description of himself. If he had an Instagram bio, this would be what he chose to describe himself to be like. Here's what it says: compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding, overflowing with love and covenant-keeping faithfulness. This is who God is in his essence. This is how he describes himself to the world. Abounding in love. Or how about this from a teaching from Jesus? I love this. In Matthew 10, he says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny?" Which, as an opening question, I'm like, I'm not sure of the market rate of a sparrow. I don't deal in sparrows much. But at the time, the answer was obviously yes, right? Sparrows are cheap. That's the point. Plentiful, easy to access. 2 sparrows sold for a penny. Yes, they are. Yet, he says, not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. In other words, ain't no birds dying and God doesn't know about it. Like that one that you hit with your car at your windshield and it died. He knows about it. Okay? All of them. He knows about all the little birds that die. He says, even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. What an extraordinarily intimate thing to know about a person. In some cases, admittedly, it's not that hard to know how many hairs are on your head. But in the cases where it's complicated, that's a very intimate thing. No, we don't know that about ourselves. But Jesus says God knows. So he says, look, what are the implications? Don't be afraid. You're worth more than many sparrows. Don't you think you're worth more to the God of the universe than a bunch of birds? But he cares. He knows about all those birds. How much more will he care and know about you, his special creation, his image bearer? He cares. Or this from Romans chapter 8. It says this: we know that in all things, again, all, not some, all, God works for what? He works for the good of those who love him. Now that's an important phrase that we need to explain more. But he's always working for the good of those who love him, those who have been called according to his purpose. Now I know this verse is used a lot, but it's imperative that we define. Who gets to define what the good is that God is working for? Well, I think the passage does, and the passage defines the good to be looking and acting more like Jesus, conformity to the image of his Son. So God is orchestrating our lives so that in all things and in all ways we look and act more like Jesus. God, according to the scriptures, is a being who fully utilizes his power to live out the fact that he loves you, that he cares for you, and there's nothing that can happen in our lives that does not come through his hand and via his plan to us from a God who understands us intimately, who loves you deeply, and has your best interests always at heart. God is the King who cares. And we have to come to a place where we trust God when things are great and when they're awful. And I think the way that we come to trust is to realize that God has never once lost control of the steering wheel of the universe. He's not sweating. He isn't nervous. He isn't putting up a cool front, but in the background he's freaking out. He's sitting on a throne in full control of what seems like the chaos of our lives. And he's weaving it together to always bring glory to himself and to create a life for you and me and everyone that brings us closer to Jesus and has an opportunity to be in a relationship with him. God is a king who cares. But look, I understand that your circumstances are hard. In fact, right now you might be thinking, yeah, but my circumstance, it's the exception. My life is the exception to the rule that God is in control. And I'm thinking at the moment of a friend who's just lost a parent unexpectedly, who's, in the deep throes of pain. And so before I continue on with something that could be misunderstood as a cliche answer to a painful problem, I want to pause. And with all the compassion that I have, I want to speak what I believe is the heart of Christ to you in your pain. If you're listening today and getting out of bed was the hardest thing you've done in your life today, I believe this is the word of the Lord to you. That the Lord is close to you. To the brokenhearted. He's close to you. And he saves those who are crushed in their spirit, who otherwise have no strength of their own, who are lost in their pain. God is close to you. You've never been closer to God than when you were in the midst of the worst pain of your life. He's close to you. I read a book a couple years ago, I think as many people did. It was pretty popular in the Christian subculture, called Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. And he has some quotes in here. This book is all about describing the heart of Christ for us. And here's what it says. Again, this is, I think, a word for those in pain. It says, contrary to what we expect to be the case, the deeper into weakness and suffering and testing we go, the deeper Christ's solidarity with us. As we go down into pain and to anguish, we are descending ever deeper into Christ's very heart, not away from it. Look to Christ, he says. If you are in Christ, you have a friend who in your sorrow will never lob down a pep talk from heaven. He cannot bear to hold himself at a distance. Nothing can hold him back. His heart is too bound up with yours. So nothing that I'm saying today is meant to be a trite or a trivial answer to your paralyzing pain. As a friend and as a pastor, there was nothing I would want more than to walk with you in your pain. Not with answers, with silence and presence and patience. Because I promise that God is at work. He will never fail you. He does his best work in the midst of our broken pain. He will never abandon you. He is in control. He is a king who cares about you. God is in control. We can trust his plan. But I think there's other folks in different kinds of situations. Maybe again you're saying, yeah, I hear you, but God can't possibly be in my situation. Maybe your pain has had some time to settle. And so it's not a fresh wound. It's something that feels like it's taken a set and it's festering and infected and is not healing. Let me gently say something, I think, about the pain that we experience. And that is that it hurts and it's hard. And it makes us ask why and try to wrestle control back from God. But the hard truth is that God didn't promise us a pain-free life. And pain and divorce and rape and cancer and poverty and difficulty, these are all the result of living in a world that is infested with the brokenness of sin. Yes, God is in control, but he's allowed us freedom to chase our own selfish desires. And oftentimes, there are people who experience pain, and I've been there, where the pain is the direct result of my own sin. When I choose sin, I get the results of sin. It's pain. And it's possible that the pain you have is from your own choices that were against God's design. We chose for a season to be in control of our own lives, but what we don't realize when we do that is we're surrendering the control of our consequences. And so the pain that we feel is mixed and mingled and made more powerful by the pain of regret as well. And if that's you, I want you to know God is not finished with your story. There's forgiveness, full forgiveness at the cross. But some of you didn't do anything to cause your pain, nothing at all. It's either the direct result of someone else's sin on to your life or just the byproduct of living in a broken condition in our world, such that diseases strike our loved ones in a pattern that feels random and impossible to predict. And the job market goes up and down and there's no way to know why your financial situation is what it is. Or maybe you have the lingering effects of abuse that feel like they're never going to heal. And for this person, I need you to know this is not your fault. It's not your fault. What you don't need in the midst of your shock and pain of having been on the receiving end of sin's consequences, you don't need another layer of asking, did I make this happen? The answer is no. And while it doesn't change your circumstances, I'm hoping there's one layer of anguish that can be removed. It's not your fault. But no matter what the cause of her pain is, the fact is life is hard sometimes. And if you're like me, I can tend to get mad at God when my life is painful or it's confusing. But I want us to pause, and before we get mad at the King for these difficult circumstances, I want to remind you of something. I want to remind you that that King, our God, came up with a plan on his own to end the consequences of sin. Not only did he give us his word and the guidance that in it we can actually avoid some types of pain by living life according to his guidance, on top of that, God also was the one who, as a king who cares, sent his son to die so that we could avoid the consequences of sin for all of eternity. This king created a world free from sin. He's preparing it for us now for those who are in Christ. It's called heaven. It's our eternal home. The king who cares for us was willing to take on the ultimate pain of life in death. He took our death in our place. He took all the consequences of our sin. And he did it not just because he's a king. He did it because he's a king who cares for you. He's a king who stood at the graveside of his recently dead friend, and he was filled with tears, not just of pain, not just of the pain of loss from his recent friend, but tears of anger and tears of hatred against his great enemy, that great enemy of death. And he allowed that anger to animate the love in his heart that drove him to a cross that destroyed his enemy forever. He is a king who cares. So much that he couldn't allow us to spend eternity apart from him. He cares more than we know, and he paid with his life to prove it. And so nothing has ever happened in your life that the king who cares about you did not allow and orchestrate in order to make you more like Jesus. And to remind you of the fact that while life is hard and sin is terrible, this world is not our home. And every experience of pain is a reminder that we're on a journey to a place where all pain and tears and death are destroyed forever. God is in control. And so no matter what is happening in your life, I beg you to trust his plan. He's the king who cares for you. And I got to admit that I'm re-believing this week. Because it's easy for me to not believe this. I don't always. But what we read from a psalm earlier, I want to direct you to some of the earlier verses. A friend pointed this out to me this week. I believe this can be our daily reminder in the midst of pain. It says this: "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Because those who seek the Lord lack no good thing." Those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. But so often it seems like we lack whatever thing it is that you want most. It feels like we don't have it, that God's withholding it from us. But I believe we need to ponder the sovereign trustworthiness of our God until we come to believe it. You can trust him for every good thing. Because even when it feels so incredibly, painfully evident that I don't have what it feels like I most need, here's the promise that comes 8 verses later that we've already seen. This promise of blessing comes in this context. 8 verses later, in Psalm 34:18, he says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." The promise that God would not allow us to lack, that he will be a God who provides, is followed by the promise of a God who will be with us in our pain. It's as if he anticipated, as if he knew, he understood that it will feel in life like we are lacking. There will be times in your life when trust is incredibly hard to come by, when his blessings feel so far and removed from you. But he still says, you will never lack any good thing. And for every time you feel like you do, I will be with you. I will never be closer to you than when you feel like you don't have what you need most. He is the King who cares. And so even when it's hard to trust, we need to seek the Lord and believe that we will lack no good thing. And when we do, he will be close to the brokenhearted. Let me pray. Lord, none of this is easy. And I know that a lot of these just sound like words to people who are experiencing really deep, significant pain. And I pray that you would be close. I pray that today, whoever's listening, whose heart feels like it will never recover, that even now in this moment, your promised Spirit would be with them, as if they can feel your presence with them, because you are near to them. And I pray for those who at the moment feel your blessing and your favor and your joy, that they would step near to those who are hurting. That as a family, you would use those who feel at the moment that they have all that they need. That their physical presence in proximity to those in pain would be what you use to remind those who are hurting that you will never leave us or forsake us. That even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil, for you are with us. Your rod and your staff, they comfort us. And so surely goodness and mercy will follow us all the days of our lives, and we will dwell with you in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Thanks so much for being a part of the Bay Area family. We're so grateful for all of you, no matter where you're joining us from. Hope you have a great day tomorrow. Thanks for being here. We'll